Hi, welcome to Biocast, CPC's inaugural podcast where we're going to talk about all topics of single-use in biopharm and bringing in industry experts. My name is Todd Andrews. I'm the Director of Applications and Business Development for CPC, and I am joined by my special guest and friend, Jay Harp, who is the Vice President of Sales and Operations from Int2 in Devens, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. So welcome to the podcast, Jay.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here and help you guys out and talk about all things single use and connectors.
Yeah, probably about 20 years experience in single use specifically?
21, 22, something like that.
Okay, so I'm similar, 20 years. A lot of evolution. I mean, I used to work at a big OEM, and I remember at a sales meeting, I was just an engineer, so I thought salespeople were just fancy people who wore suits and ties.
Played golf.
Vests with, long sleeves. And they got up there and said that there's going to be we're going to get rid of these giant tanks and people are going to make drugs in giant bags. It seemed completely insane, and it just seemed like a typical sales/marketing pipe dream. Was it a pipe dream?
No. I mean, really short answer is no. I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, kind of when I got in, it was a couple small, independent places, a couple big folks out there doing their thing. But I remember kind of the things that we're doing now that the next generation, I don't want to say take for granted. That's not what I'm trying to get at but forgetting where it came from. I remember just the simple T connectors, the Y connectors, there's a number of organizations that make these things now that are doing good by the industry, meaning all the standards, all the rigor, all the things that are minimum right now weren't minimum back in 2002, 2003. So one of my first companies, what we were doing is we had to overmold these silicone pieces together, and I'm not kidding you. They're the size of like a conference room table. There was 30 outlegs. It was huge. Like the bags that we used to put these things in were incredible. Sterile connectors were nowhere to be found at that point. So a lot of them were using the MPCs that you guys make, which are great for the quick connect, but so you'd have this monster that you would have to take underneath of a laminar flow hood and then hook things together. And then, as industries start to mature, some of these things start to occur where you can start chopping that octopus up into little bits and bobs, a little bit more manageable, but still having to go underneath of a hood. And it wasn't CPC. I remember a gal from another aseptic connector company came and met in my cubicle down in the place in Philly and took a connector at the time, stuck it together, and pulled a piece of tissue paper and said, "Ta-da," to me. And I looked at her, I'm like, whoa, what's ta-da? She's like, well, we just made an aseptic or sterile connection in this room. Yeah. I'm not kidding you. I chuckled at her and said, nobody is ever going to buy this. Like that, you are giving your process up, and again, it's not tissue paper, we know that, to a piece of tissue paper. And years later, we actually we met back up and we chuckled about that. And she said, you weren't too far off. The product wasn't catching steam. So it wasn't on glass light, but it wasn't catching steam. There was a company that she met with, and they were having real problems with asepticism. And they kind of had their hands up in the air and said, you know what, we'll give it a try. Lo and behold, we'll call it the single-use aseptic revolution happened. So it really started to break up, literally and figuratively. You're starting to have these systems that are shrinking, where you were now taking them underneath hoods. And again, it was just clunky, but now we have a device, or devices, that allow you to have those independent single-use systems without having to worry about, does the guy have the gloves on correctly and we're mating it underneath without touching the others? It completely changed how we operate.
So you're like, all right, piece of cake, no problem at all. So obviously sterile connectors are one of the evolutions. It's really good. But you mentioned earlier the word octopus.
Oh, yeah.
Could you explain more? What do you mean by the octopus, and why were they talking about in the industry?
So kind of going back, so we didn't have these devices, either the aseptic device or those small connectors to do the interfacing, right? So what we were doing is we were making what in today's world we would see as maybe 10 different manifolds that then an end user would connect together. We had to do it all in one shot. So you would have like a length of silicone with an overmolded cross, and a length of silicone with a T, and that's branching off into here. Then we have the connector. So it becomes, again, lack of a better, an octopus, because it just has this really long, thick body, maybe more squid, actually, maybe it's a squid, with all of these legs floating out into no man's land. And then keeping that to make sure that when you irradiate the assembly, you're claiming sterility on it, but you're missing all those haphazard junctions. So you want to kind of keep everything as whole as you possibly can. Not to mention during that time, technology wasn't caught up yet. There was a lot of concern around all those extra hose barb connections, right? It's a failure point, it's a leak point, and it's not wrong, but we're using inadequate technology. So we're blaming some of the functionality, but it really wasn't that fault. We were just adapting things incorrectly. Since then, as technology's improved, again, hose barbs are the least of the concern. When I work with people and we start talking about single-use design and things of that nature, there is absolutely still a place for the molding and the clean path and cleanability, hold-up volumes and things of that nature, particularly at your drug products, where you don't want to have hold-up. But for many of the cases, hose barbs are fine. I mean, it's not. That is not going to be the weak point of the assembly. So again, technology just as it's evolved with any other industry. We were talking about we've been doing this for 20 years.
Yep.
Has this been around for 25? We'll say 30.
Yep.
So it's still very much in infancy, or maybe we'll say adolescence at this point.
I like it.
So there's still room to go, and what we're doing, and what your company's doing, and what our companies are doing, I think are really pushing things forward.
Awesome. So going back to the octopus, I'm assuming, would you say it's safe to say that every drug manufacturer that incorporates single use wants the exact same octopus, or do they, or is it all the giant squid, a little squid? Everybody says I like this, but actually I want that different tubing, or I want that different filter, or I want that different bag.
I think where you're going, kind of going to standardization, that type of. So I like the discussion of when people approach me and talk about standardization. Usually the first place people go is I'll call big S standardization, meaning the whole industry is going to have a T that has a foot of tubing in each direction with one connector at each end. That is an option. I think it's romantic, but at the same time, it on the outside of that, it stifles innovation. Not everybody's process is the same. If you look at mAbs versus gene therapy versus autologous cell therapy, which is vastly different, and then even subsections inside of there, buffer management versus drug substance filling, it's so different. I like to promote little s standardization. And what that means is the industry or a manufacturer isn't forcing the drug manufacturer, process engineer, you have to use this setup and create a process around a T fitting. That, in my opinion, is insane. Right? These folks are manipulating cells to extract proteins, really hardcore, awesome science stuff, and say, take that science that you're working on and work it around this T. That sounds wild. So what I like to promote is the little s standardization, because throughout my career, I've seen customization run wild. You have organizations where you're not necessarily talking back and forth, where you would have an assembly that's a foot long, one that's 18 inches long, one that's 24 inches long, one that's 30. That's not manageable either.
Even different down the hallway.
Oh, yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Same building, same company. Right down the hallway, they don't even realize they're buying different things that are essentially serving the same purpose. Right?
Exactly. And procurement, right? Inventory management, it all goes sideways at that point. So unchecked customization is problematic. It's not good for the space. Again, like we were saying, the other side isn't good either. Everybody uses the same thing. I don't think that works. Little less standardization is, as you're beginning to develop a process, an organization should be looking more holistically, right? Think about future state. I would say if you could have, in the very simplest form, a T, a cross, and a Y with aseptic connectors at the end of it, you can make almost an infinite number of manifolds. There is a point where it becomes a little bit crazy, right? You don't want to make 8,000 connections in a system. But, if for the most part, like, hey, the way we're going to set up the reactors, if we have a couple lengths of the T's or the crosses in maybe 3 or 4 sizes from the tubing ID, I mean, you can get away with making a very modular system that is drug manufacturer A specific, right? And now you create your standard library. So then when your team of engineers or process development engineers are looking to use a new system or do a new batch or a different drug run, you can go to a library and say, oh, look, here's a library of bits and bobs that I can start with. And sometimes you may not have all of them. Okay, we'll design 1 or 2 new ones to add to that library rather than starting from scratch every single time.
So it's almost like having a standard library, little less standard.
Little less
standard library to allow the customer to be able to customize the way that they need. As opposed to telling an OEM and in your lives, current and past lives, if you had to do customization, everybody has a different print. You don't know what they want. They're probably not getting economies of scale. But now if you have your standard assemblies, customization still exists. It's just now up to you to customize. And it's safe to say that they could probably customize on the fly.
Absolutely.
Like for instance, I mean, I hear, especially during COVID, varying lead times of different common componentry. So there's a lot of companies that sell filters, very good filters. All of them are probably acceptable in most manufacturing. But if one of them all of a sudden had 10 weeks, could you incorporate modularity to be able to switch that out without changing a whole assembly?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of terrible things that happened during COVID. In our industry, the population at large, et cetera. But learning from that is the more important thing. So there's a couple of things you touched upon, and I think different industry groups, we've probably been raising that flag for a number of years, is you can get the same design or same system from several different manufacturers, but at a certain point, N-1, maybe N-2 in our space, it's going to come down to a bottleneck of one sub-manufacturer, right? So the redundancy isn't completely there to make you feel warm and fuzzy. But with that being said, there's actions that you can take to help limit your exposure. The one that you just talked about is one that I've loved as a starting point for most of my career. So if you would have, in a very rudimentary thought, have a length of tubing, we'll call it 3 feet of tubing, right? Going to an aseptic connector or some sort of connection device, whatever it may be. And then have the filter isolated by aseptic connectors, and then have an outlet of tubing of whatever size you want. So now you have, we'll go on the high side. We'll have the inlet tubing be part number 1, outlet tubing part number 2, and then you have the filter as part number 3. You can swap out that filter and have a 10-inch, 20-inch, 30-inch version and not change your inlet or outlet. You can change the manufacturers of that filter. You could have an ever-changing rotation of filters without changing your inlet and your outlet. So up front, you add 3 part numbers instead of having the length of tubing, filter, and outlet all connected as one. So your initial knee jerk is, well, now we just create 3 part numbers for one.
Yep.
Okay, but when the next time you want to run a process, you're going to have to change out the whole thing, new part number. Next time you run a different, and now you're going to be increasing, anywhere past 3, you're going to increase your number of SKUs, and then to your point, if that filter doesn't become available, well, now you're stuck, right? So now it becomes really troublesome. So having the ability to pop out key, maybe high cost sections of that assembly really will add to your flexibility, modularity, and both from the OEM side, because that helps us out as well, and then allows your end user to do the process.
So when you were working with modularity, both currently and in your previous roles, what do you feel was some of the things holding it back? Like, did you feel that customers are coming to you and saying, I want this, or were you in a position where you were telling them you may want to do this? And what was it that helped some customers kind of flick that switch? Because I'm assuming it was an adjustment to go from, I want exactly what I want, octopus form, to this is probably better for me, but I'm not sure I understand why. What was the switching point?
So it was a mixed bag. So we had some customers coming and saying, hey, and typically it was something's not feeling right, right? In the sense that, like, the amount of SKUs or the general design happening in silos. There was a customer down in the greater Philly area, I remember, and this was way back in the day when I was still down there. It was 1,000 SKUs. It may have been more, to be honest with you. But the way that it was sort of how we were talking about earlier. It was, I had a 50-liter 3D bag, 1 foot of tubing with a 10-inch filter and some tubing coming out. Then I had a 100-liter bag, same setup. 200-liter bag, same setup, up to 1,000 liters. And then go back down to the start, and then the same design with the 20-inch filter all the way back up. The same design with 30-inch filter all the way. And it was just a bear. So the concept isn't necessarily new, but wrapping your heads around how to manage it is newer. Teaming up with the supplier, an OEM supplier, and down to the N-1, N-2 suppliers that have the forethought to, at the design point, to say, hey, I hear what you're trying to do from a design. Have you considered this approach instead because of, potentially not getting stuck in a pigeonhole later, right? So when we typically don't get a blank slate, right? Typically there's, I don't make drugs. Will never pretend to know how to do that. But when an engineer gets up there and starts talking, through these years of experience, you can say, okay, I see what you got going on. Hey, instead of taking a sample there, can we move the sample here? And can we actually isolate that sample with connectors of some sort so that that little sampling section, we can use that potentially somewhere else in a different process. So one of the key things is marrying up to a supplier, to a consultant, to somebody that has that level of forethought, because a lot of this stuff, as you know, isn't written down. Right? We're still growing in that regard. So picking your partner is super key.
Excellent. What are the things that you've seen that has helped modularity get adopted in the industry?
So there's a couple of different things that I think stand out. So getting some of the interior junctions, again, not to be equivalent. I don't want to say everybody will claim equivalency in some different manner, but saying that barbs work and we allow flexibility there. Aseptic connectors as a whole, I think is important as well, right? There is aseptic connectors don't talk to each other, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Again, I think saying that everything needs to be one thing, I don't think makes sense. your company's in a unique position where you have flexibility in the sense that you have unisex or genderless connectors, which people love, right? So I don't have the ability to misconnect something. So I think those two things are kind of some of the more major points to allow for that modularity. And again, I don't want to keep tapping COVID. I think for all the bad, it really pressed us as an industry to reevaluate. I almost want to say coming back to science. A lot of our stuff is spec driven, but for some reason, a lot of the single use designs weren't spec driven. They were brand name driven and some other things. Versus, you start to take a look at it and say, is this USP 88 tested, 87 tested, Bioform 665 tested, platinum cured silicone? Is that one very much different from that one? Very much different from that one? Allow us to open up and have a good level of confidence that, the nuances between those silicones are, minor in the greater scheme of things.
What do you think are the things that are holding it back?
So it can be a big apple to bite is because where you were talking earlier, maybe suite A doesn't talk to suite B in the manufacturing site. We've seen it. You've lived it. I've seen it. That's 100% truthful. All right. What about building 1 to building 2? What about the East Coast site and the West Coast site? What about the site over in Asia? So trying to you almost had to have a really disciplined engineering kind of management system, which in the grand scheme of things, it's tough to wrap your head around. Like if a company is going to do it, and I've seen them. I've seen companies execute on this and do it well. I've seen other companies dip their toes in it and not done so hot. But it's a full charge investment to have that database and have that level of rigor and dedication to say, hey, this is how we're going to run these designs and have that centralization. So the biggest hurdle I think is taking on that program, because it's going to be hard to show on the balance sheet what that what I mean that little organization does, but that'll be the driver.
No, you're right. I think modular systems gets tricky because it's such a balancing act between direct costs versus operational efficiencies, and depending on the department you're in, you might be compensated differently based off that. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think of this. You mentioned COVID. COVID for our industry was such a giant flashlight on anything we weren't doing well. And as a component supplier, I mean, I make the analogy sometimes like we're making the tires. We don't make the car. We sell the tires to somebody who's going to make the car like yourself. So that's fine and dandy. But if you're not making cars fast enough, we're limited. And I thought right before COVID, there was capacity issues already. There was a lot of OEMs who couldn't keep up, people who were critical. So if you can't make the bioreactors, it doesn't matter how many tube sets you can make, how many connectors you can make. And so I think not only that, but even componentry. So COVID to me really highlighted that not only were there some OEMs who struggled, but there were components maybe from an OEM. And go back to our analogy, we're just one, we're critical component, but it's just one. Go back to the car analogy, if you don't make the steering wheels, then it doesn't matter everything else. So I don't want to pick on any individual companies, but I know filters were one of them, that's why we go back to that sometimes. Or clamps even, there were some clamps that were struggling. And if all of a sudden one filter company can't get that one filter, now you can't sell your tubing, you can't sell your back, can't sell the clamps, all that's holding it up. So to me, I thought, it seemed like COVID to me is probably the best case study for the benefits of going to modular.
If I have a manufacturing plant and my whole plant philosophy is based on a specific aseptic connector, and I didn't choose the right one, maybe supply chain or business continuity or whatever that you may have, I can't switch out one or two of these things. I have to strip the entire site down and start over again. we are all very much tied into this together. And, as an OEM, if I'm not doing my job, right, and the customer says, okay, I want to go to my second source, but the second source is still using that same connector, the problem hasn't changed.
No.
We're all very intimately tied together to make sure that we do all of ourselves a service to make sure that we can keep these places up and running.
Totally. And probably the biggest word I think coming out of COVID is, of all the pressures anybody has, it's really assurance of supply, right? I mean, anybody could battle over a cost, fight over $1 or $2 here or there. It doesn't really matter how much it costs if you can't get it. And think of the value of the drugs being made. And then now as we're evolving, I mean, we know bio really well, vaccines and mAbs. Now you got the gene therapy and the cell therapies. Everybody's wondering, will it explode? And everybody's preparing, what if it does?
Yeah.
So if all of a sudden your demand isn't just, we were talking earlier off the podcast about the pie chart of how much is mAbs and how much is, right now is a small sliver in cell and gene therapy. Well, if that goes like this, while the pie's going that way, well, all of a sudden what you think is obviously, you think you have your strategy for mAbs and vaccines covered, and then all of a sudden the shiny new toy, gene therapy and cell therapy, takes some of your supply base. How are you controlling it? And what I love about modular systems, and you totally correct me if I'm wrong on this, I love that it puts the power in the user. But something's going to happen, right? And the thought of not being able to do this, and all the innovation of the next drug, all this pipeline is gigantic. So this is exciting to me, because if I was an end user, I mean, even as a component supplier, we get nervous if our supply base is like you. If we're not making our connectors, or the tubing manufacturers not making theirs, it's critical. So the more power you can get, the better, right? So if you're a drug manufacturer, wouldn't you just love to be able to go, I can control, I don't have to worry about that company not having what they need, right?
And, we won't even go into the necessarily pandemic.
Yeah.
But the example you just posed, how quickly we forget. Remember when Texas froze over a couple years ago? Where does polypropylene essentially come from? And everybody was very frantic about that. Go back a couple more years with Fukushima.
Yep.
PVDF was, you're getting quoted 2-year lead times on PVDF.
Yeah.
Like, there is these instances where things can happen, and, the trickle-down ramifications of that could be literally catastrophic. Again, both of those instances, there was very bad things that happened, and we were able to dig out of it a lot quicker than the COVID. But again, I don't want to say we're sitting here dancing on a knife edge constantly, but again,
you got to prepare as if you are, though, right? It's better to prepare as if you are.
Absolutely. Never want to be a doomsayer, but kind of definitely not an I told you so. But again, we remember we were sitting in these industry groups prior to COVID and saying, hey, we need to start increasing flexibility and start really understanding our supply chain. Then COVID happened, and then everybody got really flexible. I feel like we're starting to kind of forget about that a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem to be as important anymore. I hear a lot of, hey, we're not onboarding any new vendors. Well, that's a business decision. I get it, but there is some steps that I feel like that are currently being taken that we're forgetting things that happened less than 5 years ago.
Yep. All right, buddy. Hey, man. Thank you so much for making the trip out here.
This was awesome.
This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Again, thank you, Jay Harp, Vice President of Sales and Operations for Int2 Solutions. I hope you all had a lot of fun with our inaugural Biocast podcast. Please check out int2llc.com to learn more information about Jay and Int2, as well as come to cpcworldwide.com to learn more about our connection technology, as well as articles that we will have on modular systems, as well as learning how to get in contact with our global application development managers all around the world. Look forward to seeing you at the next podcast. Thank you.